Hello and welcome to another episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Sean Merwin, here as always with Teos Abadia, but we have some special guests who have come in from the Witchlight. Teos, take it away.
Hey Sean, how exciting is this? We have Will Doyle and Stacey Allan on the show today, coming in straight from the Faewild.
Yeah.
Hello!
Hey!
Hi.
Hey, thank you for having us. We are happy to be here.
Yeah.
We are very, very excited, as always, to speak with both of you. But on the heels of the new release of the latest and greatest WotC hardcover book, we wanted to talk directly to some of the creative minds behind it, and that would be you two.
That's us.
It's funny how that works. So, for those people who don't know who you are, even though I know that we've mentioned both of you on the show multiple times, could you just give us sort of a brief introduction of who you are, what you do, both in real life and in the D&D world?
Oh, well, I am a video game designer. I've been a video game designer for a long time, and I write a lot of D&D stuff. So I have contributed to a number of WotC products, a number of the hardcovers now, and have done so recently along with Stacey as well.
Mm-hmm.
Stacey is an artist.
Yeah, I used to be a video games artist as well. An artist in video games. But I left that. I was a freelance artist. Still am a freelance artist, but at the moment, I'm doing a lot of wonderful creative stuff for WotC. So writing, I'm doing layout, cartography with Will. A bit of everything really. Fun.
So we've been working on these things together. So we both do maps and both do writing for D&D. Yep.
So if we look at the credit page for the Witchlight book, we will see you under both writers and cartography.
That's correct.
That's it, yeah.
Excellent.
Very lucky.
And go ahead, Teos.
Well, that part right there just really strikes me because I like to think, I'm good at this one thing, and then I'm so bad at other things. And how you have these artistic skills, writing skills, layout, did those happen all simultaneously? And how, or did you work on one? And how does one become you? What did you do?
We met a long time ago, and we started playing D&D together, and discovered we had this shared interest in this sort of stuff, and we were both working together at the same video games company. I guess video games teach you quite a lot about it.
There's a little bit of everything in video games when you're working as part of a team. So I was an artist, but you work with designers, you work with, a whole different range of people, and you kind of pick up a few skills here and there. And for me, writing was something that I'd always done sort of as a child and throughout my teens, but art was where I was kind of leaning towards. But then when Will and I met, we were able to we worked on quite a few, we did quite a lot of few things together.
It was interesting because, like Stacey says, she was an artist, and in my job, I did quite a lot of writing. But when I was young, I always wanted to be an artist, and so I was always kind of drawing maps and stuff. And then we had this great thing where I didn't know how to do anything with colours, so I'd be able to draw these maps, and then Stacey would take them on and colour them in and make them look suddenly magnificent. And we thought, that was pretty cool.
In fact, one of the first things we did not long after we met was Will illustrated the characters from his sort of long time D&D group, and I coloured them in.
That's true, yeah.
That's awesome.
So we discovered that we could kind of draw pictures together, which was quite weird. It's not something we kind of thought of doing before. And over time, I guess my art skills got better. And then Stacey started to write. Yeah,
I started writing again really after we had our daughter, because I was being so creative up until when I had my daughter, and then I still wanted to be creative, and I found that writing was something that I could do because I could just sit and do it on my phone if she was sleeping in the car or something, and I was like waiting for her, I could just, so I started writing like that, and we were always talking about D&D. We were always talking about you're always talking about D&D. Every meal, every card journey. So
I have the same in my relationship. It's just only from me.
Oh, that's So is the creative process then something that you work on together, or is it more, especially now that you have a daughter and there are other duties to do, is it something like you'll work on something and hand it off and not see it again until the other person's done with it?
We spend a lot of time brainstorming together. That's been really nice, and it's kind of like last summer when we were working on Witchlight. It's a beautiful summer here, and we just go out in the evening and sit outside.
It got us through lockdown.
Yeah, got us through lockdown, and we just come up with brainstorm loads and loads of ideas together, and that interaction, that continual kind of back and forth really, really helps kind of get the ideas right.
And I think because we've been doing it for like talking about just for when if Will's writing, if Will's DMing and writing the adventures for our home groups, and we're kind of batting ideas around, we're not so scared to say silly ideas in front of each other. You know what I mean? Like anything goes. You can just it's not going to be embarrassing if you say something, because that's sometimes out of the silliest comment, you can get a little seed of an idea and then we can build on that. So we do spend a lot of time brainstorming and coming up with silly ideas.
Yeah. So you're just like always in your household packing in design in around the rest of your lives. Is that sort of how it works?
Yeah. Kind of. It's. I mean, that said, I think it's really, really important to be able to shut down as well. That we always make sure that we have nights where we're like, okay, we're not going to do any D&D tonight. We're going to just chill out, watch a movie, or whatever. And I think that's really important. And some nights we just aren't feeling up for it, or one of us might not be feeling up for it, and the other one can kind of take on some stuff there. So when it comes to the writing of it, well, after we brainstormed all our stuff, we then do kind of separate it off. And so you'll go off and be writing your bit, and I'll be off writing my bit, and I can step in and kind of help, and vice versa. So we go over each other's writing.
Yeah, we edit each other's work quite a bit as we go as well.
And I guess, and then also with like the mapping, when we did the mapping, that was kind of like I do the first bit, Stacey does a section of that, we kind of finalize the sketch, and then Stacey takes it off and colors it while I'm working on the next one. So that's kind of quite separate, and I spent all my time actually, a load of time on Witchlight listening to this show, which was that's what I was doing, because it's good. That kind of that mapping stuff is very different from the writing, because you can listen and you can enjoy podcasts and radio plays, whatever. You were just listening to Poirot all the time. Addicted.
Really random.
So we'll be looking for the next murder mystery adventure coming.
Oh my goodness, I already came up with a whole sort of Poirot kind of scenario.
This guy's a detective.
He's like, Will's like, you're doing Poirot fan art. It's a few too many late nights working on the maps, I think.
Well, I know for me, it's been an absolute pleasure to watch both of you over a number of years. Whether it's things like, when Stacey put out the first DM's Guild product that you did, or, Faerie adventures that Will did, which are some of my favorites. I really, I've said this to you before, but I really dig that design and the elements that you have there, and the art that comes through. And I'm sure there are other folks out there listening who sort of feel the same way, like they really enjoy the design you've both done. And what would you say to other people who are inspired by what you do? Like, what would you suggest to try to get to where, it's a dream to do what you've done with Wizards and on all your various products, but to even get towards that area, what would you suggest to other people who are listening?
Wow. I mean, I think one of the things we try and do is, when we do get the opportunities that we have, we really do try to kind of execute them well. I think that we put a lot of work into it. We kind of have a commitment not to hand over something that's unfinished. that we will have put something
even
across.
When a first draft is asked for, we usually try and make it the finished one.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of quality control we try and put in there, and so we work hard on it, and I think we try and be fun to work with as well. It's tricky. I mean, us getting started with anything though, I think it's tough. It's just putting the work in, looking for the opportunities, really, pushing for it when you get the chance.
Yeah, and even if it's just an hour a day, if you can manage, if you can say, okay, I'll just try and do 200 words, or I'll just try this section of the map, and even if you're not, it's just trying to push yourself to be a little bit creative. I think that when you did Down with a Blackbird, which was Stacey's DM's Guild adventure, that was really it, wasn't it? Like, that was shortly after Roxy was born, and she was a little baby, and you were sitting there doing 100 words at a time, 200 words at a time on my phone.
Yeah. and that's I thought that was interesting. It's like if you can do 50 words a day, 100 words a day, you will get it done in a month or so, and you'll get something done.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about working in short spurts, because I know some people sort of wait for inspiration, and then when they feel inspired, they write 10,000 words in a day, but by the end of that day, I don't know if the final 1,000 words are as good as the first 1,000 words as you're pouring it out. But if you do that sort of work in short bursts as you get the chance, you're at your best, I think, when you start, and you're constantly starting. I at least I've seen that in creative types over the years.
No, it is interesting. It's kind of just pushing through it, but I also think you need that kind of foundation to base it on. So we spend a lot of time planning. At the beginning of a project, we do all this brainstorming, and we kind of sort of block it out. So you're not going in.
It was like a flow chart or a bubble chart of first of ideas, and then of the kind of the flow of everything.
Yeah, so it's not like you suddenly come across a bit where you're like, oh no, what do I write here? Because you've thought about everything, at least at a top level.
Yeah,
I think that feels a lot like what I do, which is to I call it overthinking or over outlining, but I sort of outline. It feels to me like endlessly, and it's little bits at a time. Like I'll take paper with me, and my wife might be driving, and I'll just be putting notes there, and then those notes I'll copy them over and add more to them, and eventually it becomes digital. But I like starting on paper. It somehow feels more artistic that way, and more easy. Yeah. But then eventually it's time to start. Usually because I see that deadline's coming up. And then I tend to be more like flow, like how some people will say they just sit there and get in the flow of it. But I feel like I already have all that foundation from the
yeah, exactly. It's exactly what we do, really, starting from paper and then taking the notes digitally and setting out all the headings. And by the time you've written out your notes, you've got a bulk of it written, and then it's just kind of working through it.
Yeah, and one of the things I learned from both of you is play to your strengths. If you're a writer, but you can map or you can draw, you have a leg up on other writers right away. Because when I was reading, when Will, you first came to my attention, it was for that first Adventures League adventure with the beautiful map.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. And so, normally I'd be reading, I have to run these 12 adventures. So I'll read the first adventure, great. Read the second adventure, great. Never really look. And I got to that adventure and I read it. And I'm like, this is really good. I saw that map and I flipped right back to the front. Who wrote this? Okay, well done. I have to keep an eye on him. Map.
Was that the one with the flying ship, or which one's this one?
That's the one. It's the one with the seated king on the on the edge of the cliff.
Right. Yeah. And so obviously the writing was wonderful, but that map was so different than anything else that I was reading at the time, because it's usually just text, and it's usually sort of following the standard formula for an Adventures League 4-hour time slot, organized play adventure, and this was so different because because you play to your strengths and because you used the talent as a mapper to emphasize what was also good writing.
Yeah, and I feel like your maps have a unique quality of being part of the mix along with the words. Like, I'll say that when I create a map, it's like the last thing I do because I must, and I really wish someone else would do it, but I have to give somebody something. So here's what this encounter looks like. And it's like the visual capture of my ideas and how it should, the room that the DM has to operate, right? But really, when I look at products that you two do, it's like the maps are an organic, interlinked part of the experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that we typically start with the map, and I think that's,
and we did for Witchlight. The maps were sort of done as we were kind of designing. Yeah,
and I think it's really interesting because when you map, obviously it only really works for location-based adventures, but when you start with a map and you start to kind of sketch things out, it's almost like you're building in the choices. And I think that's really important for an adventure, is to focus on choice early on. So I kind of, as I'm drawing it, I'm almost imagining on the page little adventurers, running around. And it kind of, interestingly, it keeps things from getting too complicated, because if you're like drawing because we put quite a lot of detail into our maps, right? So if you're drawing a room and you've got a statue over there and you've got a burning fire pit over there and you've got this, that and the other, there reaches a point where it starts to get busy on the page, and then you start to think, actually, is this encounter getting too busy here? So that it's kind of it helps control it a little bit.
Yeah. And one thing I remember is you worked on one-page dungeons that were, the map, but then around the outside were the text. And when you do a one-page dungeon like that, the map has to tell the story as much as the text. So I could definitely see that influence there as well.
Yeah, those were really fun. It was interesting how we started mapping together, because my first kind of break in D&D stuff was writing for Dungeon Magazine, and I would put these maps together, which were never published in the magazine, but we put quite a lot of work in, right, to making them look good. And I think Chris Perkins kind of mentioned a few times that he was really happy with that, and it kind of he came back for more work, so that was good. But then the one-page dungeons were the first kind of foray we'd gone into. Okay, let's do something together and put it out there so other people can see it. And they did really well. We won a couple of times. And
it was such good fun to do.
I was a judge one of those years, and it stood out so much because it was very different than what other people turned in. I mean, there were some other neat ideas as well that people created, but it stood out.
I love in those dungeons that Will always puts in the little men that he imagines wandering around.
So, but that's I mean, that is cute and it's funny, but it really is something that a lot of designers that I've worked with fail to remember, is that always be thinking of what the characters are going to be doing, and just putting them on the map shows that you are remembering that there will be people playing this. It's not just this abstract thing that you are building with no audience for it. The audiences always has to be kept in mind as you're designing, and it's a great way to do it, as well as actually physically put them on the map.
The Prismier map has the balloon moving in it, which is kind of fun because it sort of speaks to how that particular realm starts. And I just think that's a fun detail to orient the DM as to where you will start, and without putting a giant arrow that says here, because the here doesn't super matter. So it's just a relative over this way.
Yeah. Cool. And that's a good bridge to get into the actual book, Wild Beyond the Witchlight. So you mentioned that you started working on it last summer. So it's been at least a year and a couple months in the making, it sounds like.
Yeah, we started actually in the spring. Because it was. I remember us saying we were going to begin it in March, April time, and then of course a pandemic happened, and we were all in lockdown. And I remember us messaging Chris and saying, "Hey, we've got quite a bit of home time here. Should we get started?" And yeah, we did.
But we had the sort of the top level concept through, so we were mulling it over for the first few months and watching some movies and
When we look at this book, how much of this did you work on? I mean, did you kind of work on all of it, and then other people refined it, or what was the?
Yeah, I think it was. More so than any book we've worked on with WotC, we were really involved with this one. I mean, typically that they come to you with a fairly fleshed out story, and they might say to you, "Okay, you're writing this chapter or this set of chapters, and here's what's going to happen in those chapters roughly." And they still give you a lot of freedom, and it's brilliant. But in this one, we were kind of involved. Like the only story they had was like a single sheet of paper,
and a list of characters that Chris wanted to feature. So great. I mean, our initial meeting was very kind of top level, where we discussed who was going to do what, which was a real privilege, really, with Ari and Adam and Chris and ourselves just sitting down and talking about how the book was going to pan out.
Yeah, and so we were involved at the kind of concept stage for the Hourglass Coven. We were involved. All of the realms were just, this is the realm of the past, this is the realm of the future, this is the realm of the present. What's in it? So we kind of we were coming up with characters. Yeah,
we did a lot of mood boards for our characters, and they were given to the concept artists, and primarily it was Shawn Wood, who's just absolutely amazing. You just see him create what we had in our heads. That was really like stunning to see, and to sort of be involved from that early on, and to see our characters kind of coming to life like that was just brilliant.
So I want to ask a question, but I first want to pause and say to anybody listening that there are going to be spoilers, because we want to be able to ask the questions. We're not going to spoil the end, mainly because Shawn and I haven't read it yet. We're still reading through it, but we will spoil, at least the first few chapters. So listeners, be aware of that, and stop now if you want. All right. And my question is, it must be amazing for you to see like the miniatures come out with like a hot air balloon. And
no, Stacey and I were big miniatures fans. We haven't bought any for a while yet, but we've got thousands of them, So, and it was actually one of our
thousands.
Yeah, we had. It was one of our things where we got completely addicted to it. Where we would go to the pub, and there was a shop nearby which sold minis, and we'd go and buy a load of minis, go back to the pub, open them up.
Oh my gosh! I mean, this was our Friday night.
And then go back and buy more.
So now they're minis that you created, right?
Yeah. There's that big collection set, which has got all of them in there. Yeah. And when we saw the photos of all of those minis, we were just scrolling through it, going, "Oh my,
the mermaid," and
I know.
Yeah, so that's really, really neat.
Yeah, and we will be buying.
Yeah, you have to.
We do have a daughter, but we're going to put a little bit of money aside. She can play with it when she's older.
Exactly, it's her Christmas gift.
It's an investment. Yeah.
The carnival alone has, so the adventure starts with this carnival that's your entrance into the Faewild, or the Faewild adjacent area, and then from there you can progress into a domain of the Faewild. But in the carnival, there are just all of these amazing characters, and were those largely that you just came up with?
Yeah.
They're so good.
I guess for context, we when we separated the book up, Stacey wrote the carnival chapter. Ari wrote the first realm, so hither. I wrote thither. Stacey wrote yon, and I wrote the Palace of Heart's Desire at the end of it.
Awesome.
So the carnival was yours.
Yeah, I mean, Chris had, obviously Mr. Witch and Mr. Light were Chris's, what he came to us with, and but he really just had, their two Shadarkai running this carnival, and they had this sort of backstory about how they've sort of switched places with a pair of elves who are now in the Shadowfell Carnival. But yeah, we were just allowed to kind of flesh them out completely. Yeah. So that, I mean, they're probably my favorite characters, Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. We put a lot of thought and work into their story and their relationship, and how, you know,
it's really wonderful. I mean, you know, you could teach game design around how these characters, these NPCs are presented with often, I think, very few words. You manage to create, you know, contrasts and stories like Mr. Witch and Mr. Light. They're just described in ways that are very evocative, that the DM can run with, and that will create a sort of interesting outcome when the PCs will be interacting, the players will be interacting with what the DM has.
Thank you.
How do you do that? Like, how do you? Is there anything that you can give as sort of tips of how to create NPCs that come off that way?
I mean, the NPCs for the carnival, I sort of thought about all the kind of classic tropes that you would get in a carnival, and then, you know, use each of these tropes and kind of twist them in a way. Giving each character a shtick, you know, kind of generally kind of their disposition, and also giving them one sort of clear goal that the players can find out about when they're interacting with them. And just to kind of keep them that simple, you know, just have them, you know, this is their goal, this is what they want to do, how can you help them?
Yeah, I think that's a really cool point, that they're kind of, you know, it's a game, yeah. So you've got to give people something to do, and it sounds really simple, but it's really important, you know, that everywhere you go, there's something that's kind of going, okay, I need this, or, you know, I want this, or this is my problem. And that was something that we kind of carried across the whole book, really.
Yeah.
To the game.
Yeah. It's a great way to also bring new players in. Because you don't have to go deep into any combat rules. You could just say, this is going to be an ability check. And it's also something that new players can envision, because we've all been to a fair or a carnival or you know, something like that. And so when you bring that sensibility of something that the player, even the new player, already knows, then it's very easy to role play it out, have one simple check. Oh, you caught the fish, or you didn't catch the fish. And it's really neat, and I'm looking forward to teaching new players using this for that reason.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things I love about this book. Actually, the way it turned out was, it's friendly to new players. It's actually it's friendly for kids, like in terms of tone, and I think that's something that D&D hasn't done that often, and that was kind of cool to be a part of this. I could see, I could see families playing this together, and you can kind of dial up the wickedness, you know, as much as you like. But that was, I think it's kind of, there's just lots to do, you know, and that's cool.
Yeah.
And it's fun, you know. I played the 2-hour intro. And then the epic adaptation this last weekend, I think it was, with the D&D celebration, weekend before last, whatever it was. Time, what is time anymore? But when I did that, it was really fun seeing new players interact with those elements, and they just had a blast with the carnival activities.
Oh, that's fantastic to hear. Great.
and I feel like your encounter design has a sort of classic feel, but then also this modern element to it, in that it's often relatively simple and brief in terms of the text, but there's a lot of, and because of that, there's little for the DM. The DM doesn't have to extensively prep. There aren't like a million rules. The DM just sort of gets it, but there are things in those words that create these sort of opportunities for people to engage with. And so it creates a rich experience, even though it's really actually a small amount of text, which is really cool. How do you do that deliberately?
I guess one of the modules I always liked, I'm going to forget the name of it now, but the steadying of the Hill Giant King, like that, that old first edition module kind of did this thing where it was like, here's a load of elements, they're all very, very, very briefly described, and get in there and see what happens. And that kind of, I guess, that slightly old school way of doing it is maybe the way we play a bit more. That there's the adventures that we play at home are a bit like that. But I think you did some cool things with like the kind of the dials on the map and stuff. The mood of the carnival.
The map is a sort of a key element really to playing through the Witchlight Carnival. And again, we imagined little figures, wandering around on the map, and the map is supposed to be used as a kind of tool for the players, as if you've been just given a sort of a theme park brochure. And we added these elements to the map which kind of help with the gameplay. So there's the mood of the carnival, which you can affect for good or for worse. And it all affects your chances of becoming the Witchlight Monarch at the end of the evening. And then there's the time, and the time tracker is really sort of for the DM just to, it's like an hour passes, but it's just kind of whenever he or she wants to keep the game moving. And then there's various elements that happen throughout the carnival as well, that various events that are tracked on the time tracker. So
I love the mood. It's one of those cause and effect. You have a lot of cause and effect in here, and one of the elements is that mood tracker, where in the carnival section, when characters do things, it'll sort of say at the end of the scene, if this kind of thing happened, then the mood goes down or it goes up, and it's clearly a visible thing that the party can appreciate that this is happening, which is cool.
We had that. There was a bit of inspiration there from the film Legend, where the unicorn dies and suddenly it starts thundering and raining, and so there's a few bits there where we thought that's what kind of Fairyland does really well. That you can imagine it kind of reacting to
like the landscape's almost a character as well.
That's great.
But I think that having those having those kind of gameplay controlling elements put over a real sort of sandbox setup worked really well.
Because the carnival had to feel busy as well. It's a big map, and it was just for one chapter. So we had to be quite concise with, but give enough variation in events and characters that people can just play there for hours if they like.
Another built-in mechanic that I loved was sort of the time tracker or the ticket puncher, where you could only do 8 things, because I think we've all played with groups where you have one character that just wants to do all the things. And this is a very nice mechanic where it's like, okay, Bob, you've done your 8 things. Let's let everyone else play for a while. And I don't game with anyone named Bob, so I'm not talking to but it's little things like that just make the game smoother and easier to run.
I think so. That's right. Go.
Well, I want to ask about these Easter eggs. Was there like an early idea of stuff this full of Easter eggs, or did you two just go wild and surprise everybody?
I think there was a bit of that right from the start. So Chris had the idea of including the League of Malevolence and Valor's Call, which were these characters that were action figures back in the day.
And Sacco. Chris did Sacco.
Okay, I was wondering who did that.
There's Sacco clown, but I gave him his bubble pipe.
The sad clown.
They had this idea that they were going, because it was about time. Chris had this really cool kind of high level idea that it was, part of time is looking back in the past. So nostalgia is something, that should be part of the story. So that was a really cool, thing to get us thinking on that. And with stuff like with the mystery mine in the carnival, it looks just like the entrance to the ride in the cartoon.
Right.
And that was very intentional. We thought, okay, we'll put that in. And yeah, I guess it's interesting. There was a lot of stuff in this book which was nostalgic for us, just like looking back on, our years of gaming and all sorts. There's lots
and a lot of our influences from movies and books and stuff in there as well. We definitely went in.
Your Wizard of Oz characters are just so absurd. Like when you read them and you just go, oh, no, they didn't. Oh, they did.
No, those were the genius work of Chris. I think it must be said.
They're very funny.
Yeah.
And like I thought, like to me, Downfall, the organization of it reminded me of your previous Fae work in Dungeon. I don't know if that was deliberate or something that Harry did, but
no, that was it was Harry's chapter. But the way that we worked on this, and as I've worked on some of the other books, is that I do a sketch map very, very early on and kind of get that concept working with, Harry had the idea of, okay, this is going to be a swamp lair of a hag, and it's all built around these kind of, rickety sort of causeways through the swamp.
And the idea of the wells, the flooding and sinking was
So I had all that to work with, and it did bring my mind back to the adventure I wrote in Dungeon called Glitterdust, and the layout of it is a nod to that. The events that happen in there are all Harry's great work, but just that kind of swampy, like the cottage in the middle of the lake, kind of the surrounding stuff. Yeah, definitely.
So did you think about adding the D&D heroes that are in the cartoon? Did that ever come up? Have Presto somewhere sitting in the swamp.
Thinking about it now, we should have had them in the carnival.
Yeah, we should have done.
As like, on a random encounter table or something.
There's a very sad story about a unicorn in this book, which we did consider. Is that uni?
Uni, yeah.
but no, it wasn't really intended. It was one of the funny thing was. It's a bit of a mystery now because we were talking about these characters, the League of Malevolence and so on, and I was on the call. I was wearing a T-shirt with Venger on it, and Chris said to me like, "Oh, it's funny that you're wearing that Venger T-shirt because," and then the call cut off, and so we never found out why it was. But for some reason we weren't going there. But
Venger in the next adventure confirmed. Thanks for the spoiler.
That's right.
Venger and a Spelljammer confirmed.
Yeah, exactly. What? So you've mentioned a few of the sources, the movies you've watched and the old adventures. What were some other ones? You've mentioned Legend and you've Wizard of Oz. What other sources did you go to for inspiration?
Oh, we went all over the place. We had Labyrinth was definitely one of them.
Return to Oz for me is got the slightly creepier edge, and I took a lot of inspiration from that for my chapter, the Motherhorn chapter Yon.
Peter Pan was definitely something there. We did we looked at loads and loads and loads of fairy tale books. We had a whole section, a whole bunch of time where we were just reading and reading and reading. So there's some little notes there to the Faraway Tree and some of these all like children's fiction books as well. Loads.
Absolutely. I was reading a lot of folklore sort of before bed every night, botanical folklore and shadow folklore, and it was very interesting actually. But so I'm just like making notes the whole time.
The tone of this adventure is something that I found sort of surprisingly welcome. Like as I read it, I would go, "Wow, I am into Whimsy." And I didn't think I was, but it's been so dark. And even, I mean, not just the pandemic in our world, but like the adventures have been, Rhyme was pretty dark, but even before that, right? There's Avernus, and just it's been sort of we've been on this. And so was that a deliberate design choice that Wizards was looking for, or that you were looking for, to sort of inject this whimsy? Because even in the dark areas, there are these whimsical sort of, it's going to make you laugh parts to them.
Yeah, I think it was from their side. They wanted to do something that was a lot cheerier. And yeah, of course, we were writing this during the pandemic, and we channeled, I think, some of our what we wanted the world to be like.
Definitely
in there. But it is also interesting. I think that there is a when we were looking at all of our sources and references, what is the fairyland, and what are fairies? And if you sort of go back to the kind of real folklore roots of it, it is very, very dark and wicked, and there is actually very little whimsy. There's a lot of cool stories, but they very quickly take dark turns. And fairies are kind of steeped in kind of Christian myth as well. And there's a lot of this is temptation and cruelty. And if we were to take that more traditional line, we would have had a much darker story, which would have been great. I love that stuff, but at the same time, it didn't feel right. And I think when people nowadays think of fairies, they are influenced by children's literature, and they're influenced by Disney, and they're influenced by all these other forms which are more funny and are more entertaining in a way. And I think it was a really good call for them to kind of push more towards that. Everything that we wrote, of course, we do the drafts, and then it goes over to Chris and his team, and they hone it into the thing it is now. And that involves quite a lot of, rewriting of sections. And some of the darker things that we put in there were taken out, and probably for the best. It was, that's not to say that there are, not dark things in there. I think we got that kind of line in places quite well, of that sort of, you're on the edge of something creepy here, and you have little glimpses of nastiness, and things can take very dark turns. Yeah. But there's always
whimsy. Something to smile about as well. Next
yeah, I thought it was really funny. I'm on the Hither chapter currently, which I know Ari worked on, but there's this, overall it's a bog that's could be very depressing and sad. And then there is this, if you're foraging, Faewild Treats table. And it has things like, just like this pie, or just things that have no logical reason to exist. Like there's going to be just some pie on a stump in a bog that's delicious and does a wondrous thing for you when you eat it. And it's great. Like, I love it. It made me so happy to read things like that. And they're throughout the book like that. It's just so fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of your currency in the Faewild. So the adventure, is full of those things. You can start collecting them from the Witchlight Carnival all the way through, and you're bound to meet some sort of Fae denizen that will want to eat a bit of the pie and happily help you for it. So.
Yeah, you're right. That gives you that sort of, you have things, especially with the hag rules. You want to have things to exchange, and so having all these things makes sense. And that brings me to the hag rules. Or the Faewild rules. There are these 3 rules guiding conduct with Fae, which feels really brilliant to have 3 broad rules that the DM can rely upon to kind of create relationships, interactions. And how did those come about?
That was definitely Chris. Like, I think he told us that was part of his discussions with Patrick Rothers, who is the story consultant on it. Mm-hmm. That was really great, because it was, obviously we had this whole thing throughout the whole adventure where we had this guiding principle that you could tackle everything without drawing swords. There would always be a way to negotiate your way through things. And so we needed these rules, so that was just something that the DM could always lean on to kind of go, we were saying earlier, you were observing that a lot of the encounters don't really give the DM much, they set out the situation. It's a little bit like that you can read the encounter, you can get an idea of how you might want to run it, but then you have these additional tools to kind of help you out across the whole adventure.
Yeah, and it's harder, I think, now, when a lot of us who have played a lot of D&D have always run it in a sort of a tactical fashion, and we're more comfortable in those sort of crunchy rules, that we use it as almost like a safety net or a blanket. It's like, I don't know what to do now. Okay, let's pull out dice and let's focus on these things. So to teach DMs how to run games like this, I think it's important to bring back both the whimsy and the sort of joy of creation, as well as just storytelling through role playing. So I think this book does an incredible job with that.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I was just thinking, like, it does. It's challenging in that respect. I know that you can sometimes, as a DM, it's almost like you can breathe a sigh of relief when combat starts, because you're sort of like, okay, here we go. The rules take over a bit now. I can kind of sit down and relax, and so that is challenging. But we always kind of had the idea that this wasn't the only way to do it. It was we were trying to highlight the social pillar without completely taking away the combat pillar. So you can fight your way through it.
You can fight your way through it.
Yeah, sure. But it's fun. I love the way a lot of those encounters are handled, where you are presented with a situation, and it feels a lot to me like classic D&D, where when I think back on being in high school and playing these games, there would be a description, and then there would be this silence as all of us took in what the DM said and thought, oh, what do we do? And it was like prodding with a stick, right? It's like, what do you want to prod and how? And then that's where the fun would happen, was based on how you prodded. But it wasn't an obvious thing. There were many possibilities of how it could play out, depending on what you prodded with and how and where, right?
Yeah. Like I say, those are kind of a lot of the games we kind of play have that feel, I guess. It's interesting, this adventure, like when we were designing it, we thought, this is very linear, like for a lot of the sort of hardcover adventures have moved away from that recently. But actually, when we finished writing it, we were kind of like, well, it's not really. It follows it has more structure to it, but we've put in so much stuff that you can kind of jiggle around along that path.
Yeah, every group's going to find a different way along.
Yeah.
Through each of the domains in Prismere.
Yeah. And when you do enough, we've talked about this on the show, where when you have enough say in the outcome of events, it doesn't matter if the sequence of them is predetermined, because each one had so much breathing room and so much customization that it feels right. It doesn't feel like a railroad at all.
Yeah, there's plenty of NPCs that you can meet, that you can pull in to help you, or enemies that you can make along the way, and there's lots of different encounters that you can have. So yeah, no two paths through will be the same.
Yeah, and you can kind of rewind a bit as well. That we put in stuff where it's open to you sort of going, oh, you know what? Let's go back and speak to that guy.
Yeah.
If you do some of the hag missions, the hags will send you back to spy or on their sisters. So you can go back and forwards as well.
There's all this cause and effect that takes place made me often think about the way Oracle of War, the Eberron organized play campaign that you're an admin for, how it works, where it'll have these decision points that it'll say, all right, mark this down because you made this choice, and then the later adventure will sort of call into that. And I felt like that was sort of what was happening here, where you might do a ride at a carnival where you spent your ticket and you learned to ride a snail, and then later you're going to ride something and now it matters, right? I really love that. Like, was that something you learned from Oracle War, or where did that kind of come, that degree to which you did this?
Yeah, I think Oracle of War was an inspiration for it. Stacey put together the story tracker.
Yeah, when I was writing the carnival section, I sort of thought, there's a lot here for the DMs to remember in their scrappy notes or not so scrappy notes, and I thought it would be good to have somewhere where they could just sort of officially kind of keep track of everything, and it also has very helpfully in the corner the hags' relationship with each other, and it's just there's so much that you can do early on that will affect things later on in the adventure. So having the story tracker was yeah, I think going to be quite helpful.
It's funny because it's kind of, I think a lot of adventures have this. You know, a lot of adventures have cause and effect, right? They have stuff that happens earlier on that later on in the adventure comes into play, and it's just sort of often buried in the text. So what we're doing is, you know, isn't anything particularly magic. It's just a way of formatting it in a way that really makes it kind of stand out. So it's just kind of saying, okay, remember that thing earlier, or it's saying this thing is going to come up later. Remember it, write it down.
Yeah.
And then it's just doing a callback when you get there.
Yeah.
Well, it is a little bit of magic, though.
It is,
especially going back to, you know, working with a group, working closely with a partner or with a group. When you have that close connection, when you are sitting down and communicating with the people you're working with, you can keep those connections more easily than if you're working off by yourself and then you send a manuscript and someone who's writing the next chapter may or may not pick it up.
Yeah.
But you know, having that sort of close knit communication while you're working on a product makes those things more likely to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tracker, the way it's designed, is really helpful because and the adventure text will say, you know, write down that character's name, because that's something I often forget when I'm running quickly. Is I might write down this thing happened, and then I forget which player did it, which character. Oh wait, and then I got to ask them, and I feel dumb. And it's really great. I love these prompts.
Yeah.
And the role-playing cards too. Did you come up with that idea of having these summaries of how to role play?
Yeah, that was sort of based on the Adventurers League way of doing things. I think, you know, right since I started writing for AL, they'd established this kind of format where characters get called out in sidebars, and those sidebars have a little quote, and they might talk about motivations and goals or whatever. And I guess when we were writing it, we thought that okay, we're making a lot of characters here. There's a lot of
Chris he said no more NPCs.
That was just a piece of feedback.
Yeah.
But it was so we actually that was massaged as we went through it quite a lot. Like, we did have quite a lot of characters going with you, and then we invented loads of reasons why they wouldn't, you know. So
yes.
if you read through the adventure, you will see that there's moments where it's like, oh, because of this he's not going to come with you, and because of that, to prevent that kind of overload.
I like that. Mm-hmm.
But we did just think, you know, there's a lot of cool characters to play here, and I think just having those cards, you know, helps the DM to remember.
Yeah.
Now, let me quickly just say, in counterbalance, when you've got an adventure that so often has a way to avoid combat altogether, and then you often have things like, if 2 or more are defeated, they'll run away or they'll give up. Did you therefore not care at all about in counterbalance, or did you still kind of crunch the numbers and decide what is hard or medium or anything like that?
In certain areas, a little bit, yeah. We did look upon it like that. Also, I know that on the WotC side, you know, they will smooth some of that out through playtesting and make some modifications. But
it's kind of set out to the DM like what level you're going to be as you sort of progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we had kind of guidelines, but the adventure ended up being so sort of open. It was quite tricky to do that through. So to give you an example, the challenge rating for the hags that you face, you know, are really quite high, and you're in trouble if you go up against them. In one of the playtests that I did, the party got so far, and then they were like, right, shing, here we go, we're gonna fight, and it was rapidly turned into a TPK, and it was like, okay, that's difficult to balance, because we intentionally wanted that character to be very powerful, but there are so many different things you can do to change the balance of power there. There are so many NPCs you could get on side. There are so many things in the Hag's lair that you can use to change that situation, that it becomes almost impossible to put a balance on that. You know, you'd end up kind of writing pages and pages of if then, you know, you'd be going, okay, if I've got this, then change this by that, you know. It's easier just to kind of hand that over to the DM and let them roll with it.
Can you talk a little bit about how you play with time in this adventure?
Well, Chris's sort of high concept was it was a game. It's a story of theft and time. And so each of the hags represents either the past, the present, or the future. And their realms are really, and their powers and their kind of needs and desires are all based around that. And the game actually starts that you've lost something when you were a child and you go back. So, and the archfey is also frozen in time. So, time plays a big part in it.
Yeah, it was, it kind of, there were sort of echoes of it through, we tried to put it in throughout, there's the number 8 is kind of, sort of an infinity symbol, and we try and get that in all over the place.
Yeah. That's why on the map, the scale is up to 8 miles, because 8's the kind of infinity symbol and the symbol of a kind of hourglass.
Yeah.
8 and 3 are in it throughout, because 3 is half of 8. So.
It's past, present, and future.
Yeah.
And that the palace and everybody frozen in time really made me think of this adventure, Lost Tomb of Martek. Was that at all an influence?
No, it wasn't actually. That's so funny. Funny you mentioned it. No, that hadn't. I mean, it might have been an inspiration. It might have been one of those things that crept into my mind and bubbled up.
I always want to do it, but I can never think of how to rip it off without being so obviously ripping it off. And I thought, maybe this is what Will was trying to do. Had the same goal that I always.
Teos is obsessed with the Pharaoh Desert of Desolation series of adventures, so everything goes back to that at some point.
Since a kid, that's my nostalgia pocket that some hag can manipulate.
All right, we have time for one more question, Teos. If you have anything that you want to ask.
Well, all right, hags. There's been a lot with hags. How did you, when you heard hags, did you go, "Oh grief, how do we do this?" Or was it easy to make this feel as fresh and interesting as it does?
We love hags.
Yeah.
So when Chris emailed us and said it was a hag coven, we were like, 3 hags. We love hags. And Chris wanted us to kind of come up with a concept for like the hag for our realm, something that would make it different from any sort of previous hags in sort of Dungeons and Dragons. And we each kind of took so my hag was about the future. She's a kind of a prophet, and she knows her own demise. She has this rooftop theater where she plays out her prophecies in this kind of open amphitheater through storm clouds and puppets and goblins and so we were each able to kind of really put a theme to our hags. I wanted to make my hag as creepy as possible. I was really kind of channeling Mombi as well from Return to Oz, so there's quite a lot of her in there.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that hags can be anything, and I think that when we think of them in the kind of ways they're written in the monster manual, it kind of confines them a bit much, and I like that right from the start Chris was like, no, they're not green hags or night hags or whatever, they're just hags, and we can make them whatever we want them to be. And I love that. I love that idea that there is no one form of a hag. There's no one thing that you can say, right, there's obviously connective tissue that makes them hags, but yeah, they're all different, which was something that actually we had with the sort of fairies in this adventure, where when we first started looking into it, we were looking at all these different fairies in movies and in books, and the kind of the Brian Froud pictures, these beautiful the guy that did the designs for Labyrinth, and and all of his creatures are notable because they're all so different. And I didn't like the idea of us kind of going, okay, well, this is what a red cap is, this is what a spriggan is, and these are the tools we've got. So we changed that, and we were like, okay, well, a fairy can be anything, and in the Faewild, a goblin can look like a, cockroach if you wanted it to. It doesn't.
Yeah, there's ladybirds and weasels and everything in the carnival, and they're all classed as
just goblins or fairies. Yeah.
That's great. Plus, then they're wearing outfits, so who knows? That's great.
Yeah.
And the thing with these hags as well is they've got quite the relationship between them is sort of quite interesting. They hate each other, but they need each other, and each of them knows a secret about the other one. So they need each other. They could destroy each other very easily, and so they hate each other, but they need each other to sort of survive.
Yeah.
So there's a lot for for players to turn the hags against each other. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we spent a lot of time talking about that, didn't we? About how players could just get caught up in this game of hags, of trying to find ways to manipulate them all against each other until finally they all destroy each other without you having to lift a finger.
It's a really rich story. I love all the connections between the hags, the different peoples that live in the hags realms, and how they feel about the hags and why they might turn. And there's always a guide that could be found that can help you get across into the different domains. It's really wonderful. You both have done a fantastic job in this adventure. It's really incredible.
Yes. Thank you so much for giving us a great adventure, and thank you so much for coming and talking with us about said adventure. So for our listeners, if people want to find your work elsewhere or follow you on social media, where would they go?
I'm on Twitter at BeholderPie. That's probably the best place to find me.
I'm sometimes on Twitter at Stacey Allan Art. Yeah.
Awesome. Teos, where can people find you?
Find me on my blog at alphastream.org or on Twitter at alphastream, talking about Will's work usually. If not,
yes, and you can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin, or you can follow the show at Mastering D&D. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production. So, Teos, Stacey, and Will, now that we have braved the Witchlight, what are we going to do now?
I am going to go to a Faewild Domain of Delight. You may have heard of it. It's the land of Nod. I don't know if you mean right now or if you mean like just sort of generally. That's my kind of.
That's really
that works.
That is a great answer. One of the best I've actually had on the
show. I will be off with the fairies.
Excellent. All right.
I'm going to go back to reading this excellent book because it's a lot of fun.
Sweet.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been really fun talking about it. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.